The scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, a small frontier town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. The year was 1878, and the promise of silver and new beginnings had drawn countless souls to this unforgiving corner of the American West. Among them were the Taylor twins, Elijah and Ezra, identical in their striking blue eyes, sandy hair, and lean builds hardened by years of labor. The brothers stood side by side on the auction platform, their wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into their skin. Their threadbare shirts clung to their backs, damp with sweat and fear. At 21, they had already endured more hardship than most men twice their age. Orphaned at 16 and working as ranch hands since, they had been falsely accused of stealing horses by a vindictive foreman who coveted the modest savings they had accumulated. Next up, "These fine specimens of manpower," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with a greasy beard and yellowed teeth. "Strong backs, young blood, and obedient dispositions. Starting bid at $50 for the pair." The crowd of ranchers, miners, and businessmen eyed the twins with calculating stares. In the harsh reality of the frontier, human labor was just another commodity to be bought and sold. Indentured servitude remained a thinly veiled form of slavery in these remote territories, where law was often whatever the powerful decided it to be. 55, called out a gruff voice from the back. 60, countered another. Elijah glanced at his brother, their silent communication perfected over years of shared existence. They had survived everything life had thrown at them by sticking together. Whatever happened today, they would face it as one. $100, came a clear feminine voice that silenced the crowd. The sea of dusty hats parted to reveal a woman dressed in fine black silk, her face partially obscured by a delicate veil. Even in mourning attire, her commanding presence was undeniable. Victoria Montgomery stood out in Redemption Creek like a rose in a field of sagebrush. The widow of railroad tycoon Herbert Montgomery had arrived in town 3 months prior, purchasing the largest house on the hill overlooking the settlement. Rumors about her were as abundant as they were contradictory. Some said she was escaping scandal in Boston, others that she was scouting investment opportunities for Eastern businessmen. What everyone agreed upon was that Victoria Montgomery had money and was not afraid to spend it. 120, countered a burly man with a scar running down his cheek. Silas Blackwood, owner of the notorious Silver Spur Saloon, was known for working his men to death in his mining operations. Victoria lifted her chin slightly. $500, she said, her voice unwavering. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyes widened as he stammered, $500, ladies and gentlemen. Do I hear any other offers? Silence fell over the gathering. Even Blackwood knew better than to challenge the widow's fortune. Sold! The auctioneer's gavel came down with a decisive crack. The Taylor twins now belonged to Mrs. Montgomery. As Victoria's driver led them toward her carriage, Elijah whispered to his brother, "Why would a fine lady like her need 2 ranch hands?" Ezra shook his head, relief mingling with uncertainty in his eyes. "Don't question Providence, brother. Anything's better than the mines." If only they had known how wrong he was. Victoria's estate sprawled across 20 acres of prime land, centered around a grand 2-story house that combined Eastern refinement with Western practicality. As the carriage pulled up the circular driveway, the twins gaped at the manicured gardens and gleaming windows, luxuries unimaginable in their hard-scrabble existence. "Welcome to Montgomery Hill," Victoria said, removing her veil to reveal a face of surprising youth and beauty. In her early 30s, she possessed the kind of classical features that would have turned heads in any New York or Boston ballroom. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, and her amber eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. "You'll find your circumstances have improved considerably," she continued. "Mr. Porter here will show you to your quarters and explain your duties." Porter, a stern-faced man who served as the estate's butler and Victoria's personal secretary, led them to a small but clean cabin behind the main house. "You'll have Sundays off," he explained in a clipped Eastern accent. "Mrs. Montgomery expects absolute discretion and loyalty. The previous workers were dismissed for failing to meet her standards." That night, as they lay on actual beds for the first time in years, Ezra whispered, "We got lucky, Eli." Elijah stared at the ceiling, not entirely convinced. Maybe, but why us? She could have hired any hands in town without spending a small fortune. "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," Ezra yawned. "Let's just be grateful." For the first week, their duties seemed straightforward enough. They tended the grounds, repaired fences, and cared for Victoria's small stable of fine horses. The work was no harder than any ranch job, and the food, delivered 3 times daily from the main house kitchen, was better than anything they'd tasted before. On the 8th day, Porter appeared at their door just as they were finishing breakfast. "Mrs. Montgomery requests your presence in the main house. Make yourselves presentable." They found Victoria in her study, a handsome room lined with bookshelves and decorated with expensive furnishings that must have been shipped at great expense from the East. She wore a deep blue dress that accentuated her figure, her hair arranged more simply than when they had first met her. "Sit down, please," she gestured to 2 chairs opposite her desk. As they awkwardly took their seats, unaccustomed to such formality, she studied them with those penetrating amber eyes. "You must be wondering why I paid such a sum for your contracts," she said without preamble. Elijah nodded cautiously. "The thought had crossed our minds, ma'am." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I admire honesty, Elijah. Or is it Ezra? Even after a week of observing you both, I find it difficult to tell you apart." "I'm Elijah, ma'am," he replied. "Most folks mix us up." "Well." "Elijah and Ezra, I have a proposition for you." Victoria rose and walked to the window, looking out over her property. "As you may have heard, I lost my husband last year. Herbert was significantly older than me, but ours was a marriage of mutual benefit. He gained a young wife to manage his household and entertain his business associates. I gained financial security and freedom from my father's control." She turned back to face them. "Herbert's death left me wealthy but vulnerable. A woman alone in this world, particularly one with means, attracts unwanted attention. I need protection, but more than that, I need allies I can trust." The twins exchanged glances, unsure where this was leading. "I've watched you both this week. You work hard. Keep to yourselves, and most importantly, you share an unbreakable bond. Such loyalty is rare and valuable." Victoria returned to her desk. "I'm offering you positions beyond mere laborers. Elijah, with your sharp mind, I want you to train under Porter to help manage my business affairs. Ezra, your natural charm would make you an excellent liaison for my dealings in town." Ezra blinked in surprise. "Business affairs, ma'am? Liaison? We're just ranch hands. We can barely write our names." "That can be remedied," Victoria replied smoothly. "I was a school teacher before I married Herbert. I can educate you both." The offer seemed too good to be true, and Elijah's natural caution flared. "Why us?" "Mrs. Montgomery. Surely there are educated men in town better suited." Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. "Education without loyalty is worthless to me. You two have already proven you would do anything for each other. I merely want to redirect some of that devotion my way." As the brothers left the study, Ezra was practically bouncing with excitement. "Can you believe it, Eli? We'll be businessmen, no more breaking our backs for pittance wages." But Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria Montgomery's generosity came with strings they couldn't yet see. "Just be careful, Ez. Nothing comes free in this world." The next morning, their education began. For 3 hours before their regular duties, Victoria tutored them in reading, writing, and arithmetic. She was a strict but effective teacher, and to everyone's surprise, the twins proved to be quick studies. Ezra had a natural facility with numbers, while Elijah absorbed reading material like a sponge soaking up water. As the weeks passed, their responsibilities evolved. Elijah began shadowing Porter, learning the intricacies of Victoria's business holdings, which extended far beyond Redemption Creek. Ezra accompanied Victoria to town, where she introduced him as her assistant, causing no small amount of gossip among the townspeople. The twins' position at Montgomery Hill elevated their status in the community. Men who had previously ignored them now greeted them with respect. Women who had never given them a second glance now smiled invitingly. But with this newfound respect came resentment, particularly from Silas Blackwood, who seemed to take their change in fortune as a personal affront. One evening, as Ezra returned from town alone, Victoria having stayed behind for a meeting with the mayor, Blackwood and 2 of his men intercepted him on the road. "Well, if it ain't the widow's pet," Blackwood sneered, his horse blocking Ezra's path. "Getting above yourself, ain't you, boy?" Ezra kept his expression neutral, remembering Victoria's lessons in composure. "Evening, Mr. Blackwood. I'm just heading home." "Home?" Blackwood spat on the ground. "That fancy house ain't your home. You're just a servant playing dress-up." "If you'll excuse me," Ezra attempted to guide his horse around the men, but one of Blackwood's companions grabbed his reins. "The boss is talking to you, boy," the man growled. Blackwood leaned forward in his saddle. "I want you to deliver a message to your mistress. Tell her I'm still interested in buying that parcel by the creek, and my offer just went up to 5,000. She'd be wise to take it before things get difficult for her." Ezra felt a chill at the thinly veiled threat. "Mrs. Montgomery makes her own business decisions, Mr. Blackwood. I'm just her assistant." "Assistant?" Blackwood laughed cruelly. "Is that what they're calling it these days? The whole town's talking about what services you and your brother really provide the lonely widow." Heat rushed to Ezra's face, anger warring with embarrassment. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hooves made Blackwood and his men turn. Sheriff Morgan Davis rode toward them, his weathered face set in its usual stern expression. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out. "Any trouble here?" Blackwood's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "No trouble, Sheriff. Just having a friendly chat with young Taylor here. Looked less than friendly from where I was sitting," the sheriff replied. "Best be on your way, Blackwood. Mrs. Montgomery is waiting for my report, and I'd hate to tell her you were bothering her employee." With a final glare at Ezra, Blackwood wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over, boy," he muttered as he rode past. When Ezra recounted the incident to Victoria and Elijah that evening, the widow's face hardened with cold fury. "Blackwood has been trying to acquire that land for months. There's a reason beyond its water access. Though I haven't discovered it yet." She turned to Elijah. "What have you found in the property records?" Elijah, who had been diligently studying the previous owner's documents, shook his head. "Nothing unusual, ma'am. Just standard deeds and water rights." Victoria tapped her fingers on the desk. "There's something we're missing. Blackwood wouldn't be so persistent otherwise." She looked at Ezra with concern. "From now on, neither of you goes anywhere alone. Blackwood is dangerous when crossed." As summer gave way to autumn, life at Montgomery Hill fell into a comfortable rhythm. The twins' education progressed rapidly, and their duties expanded to include managing Victoria's growing business interests. Under her tutelage, they transformed from rough ranch hands to polished young men who could hold their own in conversation with the town's elite. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, currents of tension swirled. Victoria's demeanor toward them had subtly shifted. Her gaze lingered on them during lessons, and she found reasons to touch their hands or shoulders when speaking to them. What had begun as a professional relationship was developing unsettling undertones that neither brother could quite define. One crisp October evening, Victoria hosted a dinner party for Redemption Creek's most prominent citizens. The twins, now dressed in fine suits that Victoria had ordered from Denver, served as her attentive assistants throughout the night. As the last guests departed, Victoria invited them to join her for a nightcap in the parlor. "A successful evening, wouldn't you say?" she asked, pouring 3 glasses of expensive brandy. The firelight cast a warm glow on her face, accentuating her beauty. She had abandoned the severe mourning attire, and tonight's emerald gown emphasized her figure in ways that made both brothers uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, accepting the glass but barely sipping from it. "Judge Peterson seemed particularly impressed with your proposal for the new schoolhouse." Victoria smiled, settling onto the sofa closer to Ezra than propriety would dictate. "The judge is easily swayed by a woman who appears to share his interests." She turned to Ezra. "You handled Mrs. Blackwood masterfully. I believe she went home quite smitten with you." Ezra shifted uncomfortably. "She was just being polite, ma'am." "Don't underestimate your charm, Ezra." Victoria's fingers brushed his as she took his empty glass. Silas Blackwood's wife could prove a valuable ally. Perhaps you should cultivate her interest. Elijah frowned. You're suggesting my brother court a married woman? Victoria's laugh was musical but held an edge. Not court, Elijah. Befriend. Information is power, and Margaret Blackwood knows her husband's business better than anyone. She rose, moving to stand behind them, a hand resting lightly on each of their shoulders. You've both come so far in such a short time. I'm proud of you. Her fingers traced small circles at the napes of their necks, an intimate gesture that sent alarm bells ringing in Elijah's mind. He stood abruptly. It's getting late. Ma'am, we should retire. Victoria's expression flickered with something disappointment, anger. It passed so quickly he couldn't be sure. Of course, she said smoothly. We have that meeting with the bank president tomorrow. Rest well. As they walked back to their cabin, Ezra whispered, Did that seem strange to you? Elijah nodded grimly. She's playing some game, Ez. We need to figure out what she really wants from us. The answer came sooner than expected. The following evening, Porter delivered an envelope to each brother. Inside was an invitation, handwritten on Victoria's personal stationery, requesting their presence at dinner, separately. Elijah was invited for that evening, Ezra for the next. Elijah found Victoria waiting in the dining room, the large table replaced by a smaller, more intimate setting. She wore a deep red dress he had never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders, in a style more suitable for a boudoir than a dinner. I thought we might enjoy a more relaxed atmosphere, she said, gesturing to the chair beside her rather than across the table. We've been working so hard lately. Throughout the meal, Victoria was the perfect hostess, engaging him in conversation about books they had discussed in their lessons, asking his opinions on business matters as if they were equals. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that made each bite stick in his throat. As the maid cleared the dessert plates, Victoria dismissed her for the evening. No need to return, Martha. I'll see to the rest. When they were alone, Victoria poured them each a glass of wine and raised hers in a toast. To new beginnings. Elijah cautiously touched his glass to hers, but didn't drink. What beginnings would those be, ma'am? Victoria set down her glass and met his gaze directly. I've been alone since Herbert died, Elijah. Running his businesses, maintaining this house, fending off men like Blackwood who see only a vulnerable widow to be conquered. She leaned closer. But I'm not vulnerable. I'm selective. Alarm bells rang in Elijah's mind as her meaning became clear. Mrs. Montgomery, Victoria, she corrected softly. When we're alone, I'd like you to call me Victoria. Ma'am, I'm deeply grateful for everything you've done for me and my brother, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Her smile faded slightly. Is it? I've watched you, Elijah. The way your mind works, how quickly you absorb everything I teach you. We could be partners in every sense. I'm your employee, he said carefully. For now. Victoria reached out to touch his face. But you could be so much more. Herbert left no heir. His fortune, our fortune, needs someone to steward it into the next generation. Elijah stood, putting distance between them. I should go. Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into a mask of composure. Of course. You need time to consider. We'll speak again when you've had a chance to reflect on the opportunity I'm offering. When Elijah returned to the cabin, he found Ezra waiting anxiously. What happened? His brother demanded. After Elijah explained, Ezra paced the small room. So that's what she wants, one of us as a husband. Or both, Elijah said grimly. I think she's hedging her bets by inviting you tomorrow, seeing which of us is more receptive. Ezra ran a hand through his hair. What do we do? If we refuse her? We lose everything, Elijah finished. Our positions, our education, possibly even our freedom, if she decides to accuse us of something. The brothers talked late into the night, weighing their options. By morning they had a plan, risky, but potentially their only way out of Victoria's web. The next evening, Ezra attended his dinner with Victoria. Following their plan, he appeared more receptive to her advances, letting her believe he was flattered by her interest while avoiding any firm commitments. His performance bought them time, but they knew it was only temporary. Over the following days, they began discreetly investigating Victoria's past. Elijah searched through the business records he had access to, while Ezra cultivated relationships with long-time residents who might remember stories about Herbert Montgomery that hadn't made it into official accounts. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Martha, the maid who had served dinner that night, approached Elijah in the garden where he was pruning Victoria's prized roses. "I heard what she's trying to do," Martha said quietly, glancing nervously toward the main house. "You wouldn't be the first." Elijah froze. "What do you mean?" Martha twisted her apron in her hands. "Before you and your brother, there was another young man, James Collins. She brought him in as her secretary about a year after Mr. Montgomery died. He disappeared 6 months later. She said he'd stolen money and run off, but—" She shook her head. "He wasn't the type." "And before him," Elijah prompted gently. "There were others. Always young men, always alone in the world with no family to ask questions." Martha looked up at him with genuine fear in her eyes. "Be careful, Mr. Taylor. Those who don't play her game don't tend to stay around long." That night, Elijah shared Martha's revelation with Ezra. "We need to find out what happened to these men, if she's done something to them." "We need proof," Ezra agreed, "and we need to find it before she realizes we're looking." Their investigation led them to a dusty file in Victoria's private study, a room they were expressly forbidden to enter. While Victoria was in town, Elijah picked the lock using skills acquired in less reputable establishments during their harder times. Inside, they found ledgers documenting significant withdrawals coinciding with the disappearances of Victoria's previous assistants. More damning was a collection of letters from Herbert Montgomery's lawyer in Boston, threatening to contest Victoria's inheritance unless she produced a male heir within 5 years of his death. "That's why she needs one of us," Ezra whispered, "not just as a husband, but to father a child that would secure her fortune." Elijah flipped through more papers. "And look at this, property deeds in the names of her previous assistants, all transferred to her shortly before they vanished." His face paled as he found one more document. "This is a marriage certificate. She was already married to James Collins." "Bigamy, that's a serious crime." Ezra's eyes widened. "You don't think she—" A floorboard creaked behind them. The brothers whirled to find Victoria standing in the doorway, Porter beside her with a shotgun pointed at them. "I had such hopes for you two," Victoria said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "Especially you, Elijah. You reminded me so much of Herbert when he was young. Sharp, cautious, ambitious." "Where are they?" Elijah demanded. "Collins and the others?" Victoria sighed. "Gone where they can't cause trouble." "Just as you'll be, unfortunately." She nodded to Porter. "Take them to the old mine shaft, make it look like an accident this time." "You won't get away with this," Ezra said, his voice surprisingly steady. "People know we work for you. They'll ask questions." Victoria smiled coldly. "Questions require evidence. And evidence has a way of disappearing in these mountains." What Victoria didn't know was that the twins had already taken precautions. Anticipating they might find incriminating evidence, they had written everything they'd learned in a letter and entrusted it to the one person in Redemption Creek with both the power and motivation to act on it, Sheriff Morgan Davis. As Porter marched them at gunpoint toward the stables, a commotion erupted at the front of the house. Sheriff Davis's voice rang out, demanding entry. In the moment of distraction, the twins moved as one, years of fighting side by side, making them a formidable team even against an armed opponent. Elijah knocked the shotgun aside, while Ezra delivered a decisive blow to Porter's jaw, dropping the man to the floor. They raced toward the front of the house, where they found Victoria facing Sheriff Davis and several deputies, her composure cracking for the first time since they'd known her. "This is absurd," she was saying. "I've done nothing wrong. These accusations are supported by evidence," the sheriff interrupted, holding up the letter the twins had sent him. "And now that I have a reason to look deeper, I've discovered some interesting facts about your previous employees, ma'am." Victoria's gaze fell on the twins, comprehension and fury dawning in her eyes. "You ungrateful wretches, after everything I did for you." "You mean after you bought us like cattle and tried to use us for your schemes?" Ezra retorted. "That kind of gratitude?" The sheriff stepped forward. "Victoria Montgomery, you're under arrest for the suspected murder of James Collins and embezzlement from the estate of Herbert Montgomery." As the deputies led Victoria away, she maintained her dignity, her head held high despite the handcuffs binding her wrists. At the door, she paused and looked back at the twins. "You could have had everything," she said softly. "Now you'll go back to being nothing." Elijah met her gaze steadily. "We were never nothing, ma'am. That was your mistake." In the aftermath of Victoria's arrest, the truth emerged piece by piece. The bodies of 3 men were found in an abandoned mine shaft on her property, including James Collins. Letters discovered in her Boston residence revealed that Herbert Montgomery had suspected his young wife of poisoning him and had changed his will before his death, leaving her the estate only under strict conditions. The land Blackwood had been so desperate to acquire turned out to contain a rich silver vein that Victoria had discovered but kept secret, planning to develop it herself once her position was secure. When confronted with the evidence against him, Blackwood turned state's witness, revealing his own role in helping dispose of Victoria's victims in exchange for leniency. 6 months after that fateful auction day, the Taylor twins stood on the porch of the house that had once been Victoria Montgomery's, now legally theirs as compensation for their ordeal and reward for exposing her crimes. The property had been purchased by the bank and sold to them at a favorable price, arranged by a grateful Sheriff Davis, who had been investigating Victoria for months but lacked the evidence to act. "Still can't believe it," Ezra said, gazing out over the land that now belonged to them. "From nearly being sold into servitude to owning the biggest spread in the county." Elijah nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "It won't be easy. There's a lot to manage and plenty of people still resent our good fortune." "We've faced worse," Ezra clapped his brother on the shoulder, "and we did it together, like always." As the sun set over Redemption Creek, casting long shadows across their new home, the brothers understood that their lives had been irreversibly changed, not by Victoria's machinations, but by their own courage and loyalty to each other. In the cruel and beautiful landscape of the American frontier, they had found not just survival, but redemption. The story of the Taylor twins would be told for generations in that corner of the West, how 2 young men with nothing but their bond as brothers had outwitted a black widow and claimed their rightful place under the vast, unforgiving sky. It wasn't the life they had imagined for themselves, but it was one they had earned, paid for with blood and tears, and an unbreakable faith in each other that not even the most cunning predator could destroy.